It's 7 o'clock. Please take your seats. We're on Jim Host Standard Time, so we will start on time. Welcome to the Al Smith Awards Dinner of the Institute for Rural Journalism and Community Issues and the Bluegrass Chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists. I'm Al Cross, Director Emeritus of the Institute and Secretary of the Chapter. We have a busy program, so let's all take our seats and get started. First, thanks to each of you for attending. We would like to think that tonight's turnout is a sign of broad support for good, fact-based journalism as an essential element of our democratic society. I'm especially happy to welcome my successor as director of the Institute, Benji Ham, who will join us on the dais after dinner for recognition presentations. Benji, take a bow. Kentucky lost a great journalist this week, and we should remember her tonight. Sue Wiley was one of the greatest interviewers I've ever known. And she set a great example, not just for broadcasters, but for all journalists. And we hope they will follow her examples. Now, please join me in a moment of silent reflection in which you may give thanks for the opportunity to gather together, for the food we will enjoy, for those who prepared and served, and those who are being honored this evening. Thanks very much and enjoy your meal. Have you enjoyed your dinner? Well, we thank you very much for coming. We thank the Embassy Suites for their work, and we thank them for turning off the music when they can do that. Thank you very much. The many people who made this evening possible are too numerous to mention individually, but first among all, I want to recognize the longtime treasurer of the Society of Professional Journalists Bluegrass Chapter, my wife, Patty Cross. Patty always suffers the trial and tribulation of rounding up people's names, meal choices, and affiliations, and laying out the tables. Thank you, honey. We simply would not be doing this without you. Also, thanks to my administrative coordinator, Heather Close, and Scott Johnson, Director of Research and Institutional Technology for the College of Communication and Information, and Ross Allen of the college's technical staff. They're handling the tech in the back. We must thank our many sponsors this evening, led by the Kentucky Association of Electric Cooperatives, which publishes Kentucky Living Magazine, and the Tallgrass Farm Foundation, headed by our longtime supporter, Lois Matus. We're also proud of our table sponsors, who represent a broad array of interests, along with those of you who bought individual tickets. It's more important than ever for all elements of our democratic society to understand and support the essential role of journalism in that society, because millions of people clearly don't understand or appreciate it. Some of our sponsors' leaders are with us. Those at the table of the Kentucky Farm Bureau Federation include First Vice President Eddie Melton and Executive Vice President Drew Graham. Others include Dee Davis of the Center for Rural Strategies, say hey Dee, Bob Babbage of Babbage Co-Founder, and Guy Adams of the Christian Appalachian Project, Mark Gooch of Community Trust Bank, David Thompson of the Kentucky Press Association, and Michael Abate of Kaplan, Johnson, Abate, and Bird, who is this year's winner of the James Madison Award for Service to the First Amendment, to be presented next month by the Scripps Howard First Amendment Center of the UK School of Journalism and Media. Michael, stand up. The Institute for Rural Journalism has a kinship with the UK College of Public Health because we publish Kentucky Health News, and we're happy to have Acting Dean Heather Bush and her colleagues with us. Also, some fine folks from the public health departments of Kentucky, which do great service that is often underappreciated. Let's give them a hand. The editor of Kentucky Health News, Melissa Patrick, is with us, as well as Ben Chandler, president of the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky, which funds the independent journalism of Kentucky Health News. Melissa and Ben. At the UK Healthcare table is Jay Blanton, the university's chief communications officer. And we have a new sponsor at UK that's really an old sponsor, the Office of Land Grant Engagement, headed by Vice President Nancy Cox, who's also Dean of the College of Agriculture, Food, and Environment. Thanks to all our sponsors. The Institute for Rural Journalism is dedicated to a couple of propositions. One, that rural people deserve good journalism as much as urban people. And two, that at a time when journalism must rely more on its audiences for support, people aren't going to pay good money for bad journalism. These changing times have changed the Institute's mission. We still have our original mission, helping rural journalists to find the public agenda in their communities, but journalists need news outlets to pay them. So we are freshly dedicated to the sustainability of rural journalism, exploring new ways of doing business. That's just one of the reasons I wanted Benji Ham to succeed me as director, because he has more experience on the business side of the news media than I do. Everyone involved in the national search agreed that he was the best choice, and we're happy to have him on board. I'm sorry Al Smith is not here to help us walk this new path. He passed away in 2021 after a remarkable 94 years on the planet. He got UK to adopt the idea of an institute to help rural journalism and help build it as chair of our advisory board. Even after he became chair emeritus, his examples and his spirit animated what we do. Al was remarkable partly because he had a great partner who contributed significantly to his success, Martha Helen Smith, and we're glad to have her with us tonight. Al Smith was one of my mentors, and so was David Haupt. He left us unexpectedly 2 years ago, and in his honor, the Institute created the David Haupt Fellowship, which sends a UK student to report in Appalachia, where David was born, did most of his work as a Courier Journal reporter, and where he kept much of the Louisville newspaper's focus as editor and editorial director. Our first David Haupt Fellow this past summer was Ivy Brashear, a PhD student in the College of Communication and Information. She focused her reporting on her native southeastern Kentucky's recovery from the disastrous flood of July 2022. She did great work, and we want to recognize it. Ivy, come on up. Sydney, our photographer, will get your picture. Thank you. The David Haupt Scholarship Fund has grown to the level of an endowment, but we are still seeking contributions for it, so the stipend for the student will be comparable to a typical summer internship. Our college philanthropy officer, Nathan Darcy, is here and can help you make your contribution. Nathan, say hello. The Institute presents the Al Smith Award with the Bluegrass chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists, which conceived the award. Each year, the chapter presents one or more scholarships to deserving college journalism students, and several of those students are with us this evening. To introduce them and talk about the scholarship program is Casey Parker Bell, the president of the Bluegrass chapter.
Thanks, Al. The chapter's scholarships are named after the late Mike Farrell of Covington, who was a managing editor of the Kentucky Post and then a professor at the UK School of Journalism and Media, where he directed the Scripps Howard First Amendment Center and was interim director of the school. Mike was an officer of the SPJ Bluegrass chapter. In addition to the titles and the professional success, Mike Farrell was a mentor and a friend to so many young journalists like me. Mike's legacy lives on in journalists doing work across the country, and I believe will continue through the Mike Farrell Scholarship. The scholarships are awarded to students whose work indicates a strong commitment to the profession, with extra points for extracurricular activities that indicate a commitment to the local community, the profession, and that are living or attending school in Central or Eastern Kentucky, the part of the state the Bluegrass chapter represents. As I call the names of this year's winners, they will stand at their table and receive their awards from Terry Carter, our scholarship committee chair. This year's winners are Edwin Smith of the University of Kentucky, Hannah Stanley from the University of Kentucky, Emily Sisk of Northern Kentucky University, and Rosemary Kelly of Eastern Kentucky University. SPJ invites all journalists, working or retired, to join us in improving and protecting journalism, which is more important right now than it has ever been. And now, to introduce the winner of the Tom and Pat Gish Award for Courage, Integrity, and Tenacity in Rural Journalism is the director of the Institute for Rural Journalism, Benji Ham.
So when the Institute was first getting underway 20 years ago, one of the first big decisions that they had to make was to establish an award to honor people who provided great examples of rural journalism under duress. And there was no question about who it would be named after: Tom and Pat Gish. For more than 50 years at the Mountain Eagle in Whitesburg, Tom and Pat displayed the courage, integrity, and tenacity. And we use those words in each of the times we give this award: courage, integrity, and tenacity, that's required to win the award that we named for them. They took on corrupt officials, coal company abuses, local police and anti-poverty programs that often missed the mark. And in return, they suffered advertising boycotts, loss of friendships, and even violence. Lesser people may have given up, but they persevered. And this picture shows them speaking when we announced that we would establish the award and that they would be the first recipients. Winners of the Gish Award in the past have included people who overcame many of the same obstacles as Tom and Pat to fight corruption, light a fire under lazy local officials, and chase down lingering murderous injustices that occurred during the civil rights movement, and generally act as we would want as agents of democracy, protecting the public interest. A major premise of this award is the courage to do important public service in rural journalism. And that watchdog journalism is harder to do sometimes in smaller places. This year's winner has overcome those obstacles for many years. most notably last year when his town suffered a school shooting that left 19 children and 2 teachers dead. And we're reminded of the terror of that as we learn about what's going on in Maine with what they would have gone through during that period. The winner of the 2023 Tom and Pat Gish Award is Craig Garnett, editor, publisher, and owner of the Uvalde Leader News in Southwest Texas. Fortunately, he is out of the country right now and unable to join us, but he will receive the award February 29th at the University of Texas in a symposium on courage, tenacity, and integrity in rural journalism. And the Institute, Al and I are co-sponsors with that, along with the Texas Center for Community Journalism. So we will give him the award then. But in the meantime, we wanted to share with you some of the work that had earned him the award. And so as we look at it, how does a Trice weekly paper handle the tragic evil of a national proportions that left even one of its reporters with a dead child? This is the front page. It's very striking. And that's the back page of the first issue after the shooting. The general manager and photographer, Pete Luna, told the New Yorker that the blacked out front page was how we feel right now in that community. The next issue had profiles of the dead and other information that readers wanted and needed, including the admission from the police that they botched their response, and an editorial from Craig that said a regional police official couldn't answer why it took an hour to stop the tragedy. And he wrote in this column, "It pains me to write these words of criticism about law enforcement, but parents and the community have the right to know. They must be told why police, whom parents at the scene begged to go in and save their children, failed to act. They have to know to begin to heal." He said, "There's a final question that no one will ever adequately answer. It came on Thursday of that week in the form of a text message from our reporter, Kimberly Rubio, whose 4th grader Lexi did not come home that day. And her text to Craig was, 'Why would someone hurt my baby?' In an editorial a month later, Garnett wrote, 'No mass school shooting in the United States has ended with such glaring failures in both law enforcement response and school district security.' And he called this response a rudderless ship cast into a hurricane. He endorsed more gun control, which you might know doesn't go over real well in that part of Texas. But he took the criticism and the pushback. Also, he criticized the police, and that didn't go over real well. But he persevered, as Tom and Pat Gish did. Managing editor Megan Garcia said in nominating him for the award that he had made a dogged pursuit to learn how so many things went wrong that day, how every single fail-safe had failed. Said it wasn't the first time our coverage or his politics went against the grain. He's never been afraid of taking a stand or telling the news, despite how unpopular it might be with subscribers and advertisers who are also often his friends, as it might be in a small community. His wife, Melissa, told the selection committee one of his best columns was about their son's process of recovering from drugs. And it was painful to write. She said it took courage, and he must have hit all the right notes as the response was great, and he'd taken the bold step of using his own pain with an addicted child to remove the stigma of talking about addiction in that community. We asked Craig to record some remarks for you, and we'll bring those up now, and we think you'll appreciate and remember them.
First off, I want to give my sincere thanks to Al Cross, Ben Gish, and of course, Tom and Pat, who set the benchmark for this award. I wish I had known them. I think they must have been remarkable people to have created this kind of legacy that your university continues to put forth and to maintain and to dignify. We in communities like Uvalde are seldom singled out. Community journalism is not at the top of everybody's list, but I guess it seems mundane to people in larger areas. They don't think that small towns have much going on, but it is that commitment that we've made to our communities to record their history with accuracy and dignity that actually prepares us for something like a mass school shooting. What happened in Uvalde was crushing. It continues to be an enormous weight on many of our shoulders, especially the families of victims. And we have endeavored to cover every aspect of that shooting. We still are working for information, accountability from various institutions, particularly our city and our school district and our law enforcement officials. We plan to follow that to its conclusion, whatever time it may take. But being successful at that, and community journalism, as most publishers know, depends on your people. And I happen to have a group of journalists who are beyond amazing. None of us graduated from elite universities. Some of us don't have college degrees. But after the tragedy on May 24, each one of them brought something extremely important to our coverage. And there are a grand total of 5 of us. So there wasn't a lot. It didn't take long to have our discussions with each other and to plan our day. And it's true in most of the newsrooms across this country in community journalism. But it brings you together in a way that nothing else can, I don't suppose, unless it would be a foxhole. So we learned from that. And one of the things we've taken away from May 14th is that we didn't do enough before. We have a wall full of plaques from the South Texas Press Association, the Texas Press Association, but we didn't do enough. We didn't ask enough questions. We didn't hold people running for elected office to account like we should have. We didn't question people who wanted to run our institutions closely enough. What motivated them? What experience did they have? What would they do in a crisis? And we certainly didn't hold our law enforcement to a high enough standard, the people who swore to protect us. So we will work harder in the future to do that, to make sure that we know as much as we can about people who intend to lead our community, especially in the aftermath of the tragedy. We want to know how they'll react. And it's not entirely possible. There are all kinds of things that pop up that you can't plan for, but you can get a sense of where people's souls lie and what their commitment is to your community. And that's what I would advise to my fellow publishers in small towns. Pay attention. Pay attention to everything, to those people who run institutions, to the kid who's slipping between the cracks, who might one day become the same school shooter we had. Be invested beyond what you are now, if that's possible. I know most of you work your hearts out, but if there's one thing that we would like to do better, it would have been that. So I'm terribly grateful. I said that already, But the Institute for Rural Journalism and Community Issues at the University of Kentucky is doing a world of good for those of us out here in the hinterland when they recognize one of us for courage, integrity, and tenacity. I don't know 3 words that inspire a publisher more than those. And I can tell you right now, we have courage and we have integrity. And it's that tenacity that makes the difference between success and failure. So stick with what you're doing. Thank you.
As you can tell just from that video, you get a sense that for him, this is a calling. Anybody who's covered tragedies will tell you they would rather not be in the position of receiving awards. They would rather trade that not happening in their community. But when it does, it's important for Craig and others to do all of the diligent work that they did, because that helps others as they're covering along the way. So we're honored to honor him, and again, we will see him again in February in person to present him that award. Thank you.
Patty. She'll make fun of me for that later. The SPJ Bluegrass chapter conceived the Al Smith Award to recognize outstanding examples of public service through community journalism by Kentuckians. The standards for the award were set by its namesake, who published weekly newspapers in Kentucky and Tennessee, was the founding host of KET's Comment on Kentucky. He was an Appalachian Regional Commission co-chair and the main co-founder of the Institute for Rural Journalism. Al Smith was the first recipient of the award named for him. Several other winners are here with us tonight. In chronological order, Jennifer P. Brown, who won the award as editor of the Kentucky New Era and now publishes the Hoptown Chronicle. Jennifer, can you give us a wave? John Nelson, who won as editor of the Advocate Messenger in Danville and was later with Landmark Community Newspapers. Sharon Burton of the Farmer's Pride and the Adair County Community Voice. Ryan Craig, who won as publisher of the Todd County Standard and is now UK's student publication advisor. He's not here, but that's okay. KPA Executive Director David Thompson, the longest tenured director of a newspaper association in North America. And Becky Barnes, who recently retired as editor of the Cynthiana Democrat, the only place she ever worked for 47 years. This year's winners are Ben Gish and Sam Adams of the Mountain Eagle in Whitesburg. Ben is the son of Tom and Pat Gish, and as an editor and publisher, he has upheld their legacy. Sam? Especially last year, when the Eagle set a new standard for disaster coverage by a weekly newspaper after the disastrous floods in southeastern Kentucky. Sam is the Eagle's reporter. He did most of the coverage of the flood that devastated much of Letcher County, of its aftermath, and of the recovery efforts. The coverage was an amazingly broad and deep example of public service through community journalism. So was Ben Gish's decision in the 6 weeks after the flood to forego the $1 charge for a single copy of the Eagle, which constitute most of its circulation. The Eagle was nominated by Dee Davis of the Center for Rural Strategies, who wrote, The newspaper's exemplary journalism has informed the county and held political leaders accountable for their response to the flood. Also with us tonight is Phil Primack of Boston, a former Eagle reporter who offered insights on how Ben Gish learned and lived his parents' legacy when he was still young. He said Ben learned about the coal industry by working in an underground coal mine one summer, then was targeted by police after the 1974 fire that destroyed the Eagle's office. The fire was arranged by a Whitesburg policeman who didn't like the paper's coverage and commentary about police harassments of teenagers, including Ben. Police tried to frame him for the fire, and he agreed to a lie detector test to prove his innocence. The high school senior, once wrongly accused of burning down his parents' paper, is today keeping it alive. Sam also has deep local roots and experience that inform his reporting and writing. Week to week, he quietly offers a master class in community journalism. Whatever the topic, he knows how to get it, and how to write it, and how to put a headline on it. Whatever, he keeps himself in the background, wastes no words, treats his sources with respect, and he knows the intelligence of his readers. In short, he's the perfect fit for the Mountain Eagle. And we think Sam and Ben are perfect fits for the Al Smith Award. So, congratulations, you two. Please come and accept your award.
Careful with the top.
Yeah, say a word.
Just give us a look and a promise.
I'll do that. When Al called me last or earlier this year, I don't know, it's been a long time ago, and told me that Sam and I've been chosen for this award, I was all excited until it occurred to me I would have to get up here and speak about it. But I do want to thank the Society of Professional Journalists Bluegrass Chapter for sponsoring the award. I want to thank Dee Davis for nominating me and Sam. And I want to give a special thanks to Al Cross and his wife Patty for the 2 decades they put into this thing. And also want to welcome Benji Ham in taking Al's spot in the thing. I think I'll speak for Sam, or can speak for Sam, when I say that neither of us expected to receive an award for just doing our jobs and covering what has become the single most life-changing event in our part of the state. I remain very proud. I know my parents would be proud also of the great coverage Sam continues to give to this story and the ongoing efforts to recover from this 1,000-year flood. Even today, Sam was forced to delay his trip down to Lexington from up in Letcher County so he could be in Jenkins for an announcement from Governor Beshear this morning, or this afternoon, early this afternoon, that there's going to be a new 115-home housing development funded by the state for flood victims, which is a good thing. And on another point, I understand that one of the reasons I'm winning this award is for the decision to give away the newspaper for free after the flood. That was not my idea. That came from my wife, Mary. But after the first week, I enjoyed not having to. You go to I do a little paper route up there still after all these years, and you go to the newsstands and there's no papers left. And I thought, hell, this is great, you know. So finally, I decided to give them away free for week 2, week 3, week 4, week 5, and week 6. And finally, when it got time for week 7, my circulation manager, Pam Walker, said, "You got to quit this. The regular subscribers are getting all angry, wanting to know if you're going to give them 6 free issues as well." So, but again, thanks. It's an honor to receive the Al Smith Award. I've known him since I was a young child, and I can remember being part of some serious spirited conversations between him and my father, usually over their disagreements over the Appalachian Regional Commission. So, but, I could go into that all night, but I won't. So I'll sit down.
Thank you, Ben.
Ben mentioned the visit by the governor today. Last night I got an email from Al Cross saying, "Doesn't he know that you have other things to do today?" Said, "I'll call him tonight and tell him," but it didn't work. We have covered the recovery of this flood quite a bit. But something I think that's just as important as covering the recovery is preparing people for what comes next. A lot of people are stuck on the term the 1,000-year flood, and they think that this is not going to happen to me again for 1,000 years, so I can build right here. I'll be dead by the time it happens again. But when you look around the country, California had enough rain to end a 6-year drought from the first hurricane to make landfall in 85 years. Just yesterday, Mexico had the most powerful hurricane that has ever hit the Acapulco area in Mexico. You had a third of Pakistan in 2022 that was underwater. This is not usual, and it's not just here in Kentucky, it's all over the world. And I think that we need to let people know that this is not business as usual. Just because it's a 1,000-year flood doesn't mean we're not going to have another one next year. I do appreciate the award. Not sure we deserve it for doing what newspapers are supposed to do, but I'm not going to say that too loud because it looks pretty nice and I don't want to give it back. So, all right. Thank you all.
The Institute has a lot of great supporters that have been with us for a long time, and we count our keynote speaker today as one of them. Very honored to have her here. Susan Page is Washington Bureau Chief of USA Today, has incredible experience, has covered 11 presidential campaigns, interviewed the past 10 presidents, and as a journalist, she wants to make sure we clarify that 3 of those were after they left office, and 1 before he moved in. But still, it's extraordinary to have someone with that experience here tonight to talk with us. She's also the author of 2 best-selling books, one involving Nancy Pelosi and the other one Barbara Bush. She has just recently almost completed, a biography of television pioneer Barbara Walters. That will be published, the book called The Rule Breaker. It'll be published in April by Simon & Schuster. She's a native of Wichita, Kansas, a graduate of Northwestern and Columbia Universities, the proud mother of 2 sons, been president of the White House Correspondents Association and the Gridiron Club. She's won every journalism award given specifically for the coverage of the presidency, including the Gerald R. Ford Award, which she's won twice. In 2020, she moderated the vice presidential debate, becoming the first print reporter to be a solo moderator for the Commission on Presidential Debates. We had the honor of listening to her earlier today as she spoke with Kentucky Colonel students, and it was just wonderful hearing the stories and how compelling they were, and so we're in for a treat tonight, so please welcome Susan Page.
You know, we only keep contributing to the Institute because Al Cross keeps hitting my husband and me up every year to make a contribution, and we're afraid to say no to him. So, thank you, Benji, for that very nice introduction. It's so good to be with you tonight. It's so inspirational to hear about the people who are getting your awards. I'd come from Washington with a little-known fact, which is that before House Republicans finally managed to elect somebody as Speaker, they were this close to drafting Al Cross for that job.
Hal Rogers.
Yeah. This is such a happy occasion. I'm honored to share this stage with the scholarship winners and with Ben Gish and Sam Adams. Congratulations. It was great to hear your comments. Congratulations on your award and your coverage of the historic flood, which cost 45 people in your community their lives. And congratulations on receiving the Al Smith Award, which I have only recently learned is named not for the New York Al Smith, but for the Kentucky Al Smith. I was so struck by the video of the winner of the Gish Award, of Craig Garnett's, both his tenacity and his humility, which are, as he continues to hold to account officials in the aftermath of that terrible school shooting. It takes your breath away. He's standing up for those 19 kids and 2 teachers and their families, and he's continuing to do that. So a happy night for that reason, but to be honest, not really a happy time for the industry that we share and love. For one thing, newspapers are folding right and left. Smaller papers in rural areas have been particularly hard hit. Talked to Ben and Sam about the challenges they face in Whitesburg. In less than a decade, more than 2,500 publications in the United States have either folded or merged with some other paper. We've got more news deserts where people have no reliable place to go for local news. For another thing, trust in journalism, trust in what we do, has crashed. Gallup released a poll about this last week. The percentage of Americans who have a great deal of trust in what journalists report and write is now 7%. 7%. That's just the people in this room. I mean, that could be just people who work in journalism saying they have a great deal of trust. And in contrast, more than a third of Americans now say they have no trust in what they read in the news media. No trust at all, none. This is a shift in the United States. During the 70s, 2/3 of Americans said they had a great deal or a fair amount of trust in the news media. Now, 2/3 of Americans say they have not very much or no trust at all. And we see journalists around the world facing more than invective. For the first time since the end of the Cold War, Russia has seized an American journalist and charged him with bogus charges of espionage. Evan Gershkowitz of the Wall Street Journal has been behind bars for 6 months now. Last week, Moscow arrested another American journalist, an editor with Radio Liberty. Last year, 67 journalists around the world were killed for doing their jobs. And in the past 3 weeks, 24 journalists have been killed in the violence between Hamas and Israel in a war that is about to explode. And yet, here we are. We are fighting the good fight. There is no other place, I think, we would want to be. That's because journalism is an essential element of democracy. It is a bulwark against autocracy. Without journalists, where would government whistleblowers go? Without journalists, who would be in a position to subject police departments and school boards and sometimes even churches to scrutiny? Without journalists, who would have taken up the cause of the Me Too movement, costing some of the most powerful men in media and corporate America their jobs? Without journalists, who would protect our elections from those who would use their power to overthrow them? This summer in Marion, Kansas, which is my home state, the police chief was so worried about a story that the Marion County Record was working on about him that he got a subpoena and raided their offices. They seized computers and phones in what was a violation of federal law, not to mention the First Amendment. In the aftermath, the police chief has been suspended and the Marion County Record has gotten its equipment back. And this spring in Idabel, Oklahoma, the McCurtain Gazette-News recorded top county officials discussing wanting to kill one of the reporters at the newspaper while remembering fondly the days when a sheriff could, quote, take a black guy, throw him in a cell, and beat him. The sheriff was suspended. The jail administrator was put on leave. One of the county commissioners resigned, and the state attorney general opened an investigation. That is what journalists do. That is what journalism does. We also do more. We help readers understand how to file for federal disaster aid after their town is flooded. We track high school sports. Does anything get the kind of ratings that high school sports do? We warn readers when a local bridge has been condemned. We recommend where to go to get the best pizza in town. We knit communities together. Rural journalism has some of the answers for all sorts of journalism. Lessons on covering the news and earning trust from readers. Local news is more trusted than national news. Why? You are connected to your communities. You cover the news that matters most to your readers. If you get something wrong, you're going to hear about it from your next door neighbor. That really increases the pressure to get things right and correct things when you don't. Those are the qualities that every news organization ought to aspire to as well. That is the lesson of the Institute for Rural Journalism and Community Issues. It trains and supports rural journalists. It helps them to better understand how to survive, how to exercise editorial leadership in small markets. It also helps inform big city journalists about rural issues. It partners with universities across the country. Rural journalism is irreplaceable. After all, unless you live on the Upper East Side, you can't count on the New York Times to tell you what's going on in your neighborhood. CNN is not going to cover what's happening in Whitesburg. You have to rely on the Mountain Eagle for that. There's one more thing that keeps us in journalism. It happens to be the best job in the world. It is fun and interesting and satisfying, and it matters. It matters when you get results, when you hold the powerful to account, whether they're a government official or a corporate executive or a university president or a bigwig of any sort. When you can shine a spotlight on a hero, when you can get justice for someone who's been denied it, when you comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable, when you make a difference in someone's life, when you make your community better, make your nation better. So here we stand, and here we will stay. In closing, I want to offer a final word about my old friend and former colleague, Al Cross. At the Louisville Courier-Journal, Al was the master at covering Kentucky politics. He is a former national president of the SPJ, the nation's oldest and largest journalism organization. And he has been the heart and soul of this institute. When he told me that this was the last of these annual dinners he would be running, I knew I wanted to be here. Thank you, Al, for all you do.
You're welcome.
And thank you all for all you do, and thank you for being here tonight.
Susan's used to asking the questions, but she has graciously accepted our invitation to take some questions from you, if anyone has one. And I'm sure there's a whole journalist table over there. There's got to be some questions.
Yes.
We're about a year away from the presidential election. What's the forecast? What's happening around the country? What are you picking up and hearing?
Well, my prediction in 2016 wasn't too good. So with that caveat, I mean, we did a poll. We were in the field last week with a new USA Today Suffolk poll, and the presidential race was tied 37-37. I don't know what's going to, so clearly either President Biden or Donald Trump could win. It's undeniable. That's something I didn't believe in 2016, and I was wrong. We got the complication of some third-party candidates and of a possible no-labels ticket, bipartisan ticket. So I don't know what will happen, but I do know this, that we are a closely divided nation and fiercely polarized, and in Washington these days, almost dysfunctional. So sometimes elections have a cleansing effect. Let's hope for that this time. Yes, sir.
I have a question, given your national perspective. The New York Times just had to publish I think they called it an editor's statement in terms of their initial coverage of the bomb or fragment of a bomb that went off into that Palestinian hospital.
Yeah.
And of course, what struck me was just the immense power the press retains. We all are concerned and in some respects wringing our hands over the economics of the news media, but yet the power clearly is still there because it plainly shapes some public opinion. I was curious from your perspective as someone who's been in different locations, how should local journalists, editors, publishers, what are the lessons that can be taken from something like that? Because, as you say, we may get a rumor about a high school football coach about to get fired, or somebody's doing this at a school board. So it may not be as big as the Palestinian-Israeli argument or war, but we have those kind of more smaller issues that we need to be aware of.
Yeah. Well, the Times headline was really terrible because it accepted the assertion, which they had not yet verified, that it was an Israeli assault that exploded at that hospital, which we now believe turns out not to be true. And the perception of that has really inflamed tensions around the world. It had a big effect that the initial headline on that story was misleading. It wasn't exactly inaccurate because at the end of the headline they say Hamas says, but it certainly left a misimpression for anybody who was glancing at the headline. And it, as you say, it has had enormous consequences. And so what's the lesson of that? Well, one thing, be careful with what you report. Make sure it's right. If you need to take another day to confirm something, do so. And the second lesson is if you get something wrong, fix it. fix it with the same energy and play that you made the original mistake. I mean, why do we think Americans have lost faith in the news media? It's because there are some things that we've gotten wrong, and there are corrections that we haven't made or we haven't made big enough. You know, I think readers understand that when you're doing a daily newspaper or a twice weekly newspaper, you're probably going to make some mistakes, right? You're covering a moving target, which is the news. But if you make a mistake, you should acknowledge it and you should make it right. So what lessons did you take?
Very similar. I thought the thing that impressed me the most was that the Times, instead of just burying a correction or, you know, somehow in an op-ed or an editorial, they made it very clear an editor's note. And as I recall, it was both in one of the regular emails, but also on the web pages, pretty much the very top of the trip.
Yeah.
And so that was a big lesson I took. If you mess up, make your correction as big as
Right.
you mess up.
And be careful. I mean, how many times have we covered, tragically, how many times have we covered mass shootings where that you report a number of people who were killed and then it goes down? You know, if you don't know what's what, don't, you know, do not make an error that then leaves people convinced of something that's not true. Even despite the competitive pressures that we all feel. Yeah. Yes, sir. It's the award winner.
How much do you feel that the 24-hour news cycle with the internet has contributed to bad headlines like that?
Totally. I mean, you know, it used to be, and this shows how old I am, where, you know, you'd have one deadline. You'd have a deadline at 6 or 7 p.m., and then you'd have another 24 hours before you'd have another deadline. So it gave you a little breathing space on breaking stories. But there is no, you know, every minute is a deadline now. And there are, you gain readers if you're first with something or if you have the sexiest version of something. So that gives you a big incentive to take a risk on something you're not sure about, to push it a little farther than you actually have it nailed down. And you don't find responsible news organizations doing that, but now, you know, everybody's a journalist. Anybody can post on Twitter or X and get a lot of attention. And it's contributed to, I think, the fact that people no longer know what they believe. The other thing that's happened with the internet and all these sources, all these different ways to get information is, and this is a little bit of a cliche, but people are looking for confirmation, not information, right? People watch the cable TV network that kind of tells them what they already think, and then think they've heard the news, as opposed to trying to figure out, you know, there are things that are true or false. There is an accurate version of an accurate account of when things happen, but there's, you know, there's now a news outlet for any point of view. And that's been part of the balkanization that I think has affected the polarization in our country. You know, you go to Congress and they don't even agree on the facts of what happened, much less what it is we should do about it. Obviously, people have different points of view on the policies we ought to pursue, but how do we get anywhere if people do not agree on just the basic facts of what happened? Do you find it an effect in Whitesburg?
Not so much. We do more breaking news now on the web.
Mhm.
But have you have any opinion as to whether some of the larger organizations that do intense web coverage are using people who are maybe more versed in internet and tech than they are in journalism?
Yeah, well, it's a fair question. Although it's, you know, I was talking to the kids at the university about this today. I mean, it's still journalism, right? Journalism doesn't depend on your delivery platform. Journalism depends on what you do, which is go out, find out what happened, and tell people about it. And you can do that whether you're writing a newspaper story or writing a book or posting something on Facebook. So it seems to me the obligation and the effect is the same, but there's just, we still have not figured out how to, I think, let people know when things are misinformation or disinformation. And Elon Musk is making it much harder for us to do that. Yeah. Does somebody have a really great question to end with? Come on. Some of you smart people. Yes, okay, here it is. A smart question.
Given your incredible record of access to the most powerful people on earth, those people increasingly don't feel a responsibility to talk to people like you anymore. There are COVID press conferences where you can control the questions that you take. There are very selective people that you talk to. Do you think this is going to change, or do you think this is the new standard, that you can bypass the toughest journalists and talk directly to your people?
Yeah, well, it's an option now. People don't need us as the interlocutor. But, and you know, President Biden has given fewer news conferences and done fewer mainstream interviews than any modern president. And I think it's cost him. I think it's one reason he has questions about his age. I think if he was out there doing news conferences more regularly, doing interviews with the reporters who cover him every day, people would be reassured that he's vigorous and healthy. So I think it's possible to do that, but I think there's a big payoff for public officials who talk to journalists, who aren't afraid of it, who do news conferences, who don't, you know, have some PR person standing there saying you can't ask that. You know, you saw a reporter for NBC ask the new speaker about his leadership in efforts to overturn the 2020 election, and she was booed, and Congresswoman Virginia Foxx said, shut up. I don't think that made Virginia Foxx look good. So, anyway, thank you all. Thank you very much. It's so nice to be here tonight. Oh my.
A little token of our appreciation.
Oh, my goodness. Thank you. Look at that. Oh. I gotta say, since I arrived here this afternoon, I've never seen so many different kinds of bourbon. Thank you.
Well, we'd like to think that's one of the better kinds, and we're very happy you were able to join us tonight, Susan. Benji, what do we have to say to wrap up? I bought it at the Brown Barrel.
We have one more thing here tonight, and that is that many of you know Dean Jennifer Greer, who is now Vice Provost Jennifer Greer. So she has a final message, and love to invite her up here.
I think Al Cross is wondering what I'm doing up here, but
I'm prepared for anything if we're standing at the mic.
my office is in the main administration building now, so I can do what I want, Al. So yes, I have the honor of telling you a little story about when Al Smith and Rudy Abramson dreamed up the Institute for Rural Journalism, and I'm so glad Martha Helen is with us here tonight. They envisioned an effort to help rural newspapers in Appalachia address the region's difficult issues. Al and Rudy were former co-chairs of the Appalachian Regional Commission. In that role, they recognized the lack of vigor, that was their word, and limited resources that rural newspapers had in comparison with their metropolitan counterparts owned by big media companies. When they decided to do this institute, first they had to find a home for it. They looked to institutes of higher learning where ideas and sources live. Thankfully, they found the home at the University of Kentucky. Then they looked for financial resources. They focused on the ARC, the Society for Professional Journalists, and the Knight and Ford Foundations. And finally, they looked for the person that could make it all work. There was only one man they considered, and that was Al Cross. You all know the rest of the story. Since 2004, Al has shaped the Institute, finding ways to help rural journalists set the public agenda on issues like education, the environment, healthcare, and economic development. Al Cross has accomplished all of this with a multifaceted approach. He recognized great work through the Gish and Al Smith Awards, presented here tonight. He created content and shared it at no cost with media outlets across the country and abroad. His work on healthcare is especially noteworthy in the impact it's had on our communities. He shared knowledge through seminars and summits. He championed open government. He offered guidance to small newspapers facing a digital onslaught. Above all, he was there for advice and leadership. When Al's pending retirement was announced, the Bluegrass chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists received a flood of nominations suggesting that his name appear on the Al Smith Award. And quite frankly, we knew he wouldn't let us do it unless we surprised him. They needed no convincing that his name should be on that award, only a scheme to keep it a secret so he could not stop us. And it was a secret until this moment. Still, I would like to share a few words from those who wrote nominations about Al. A recurring theme emerged that Al is a kind of North Star for the field of rural editors. You will recognize some of the names that nominated him because all of their names appear on the Al Smith Award. In his nominating letter, KPA Executive Director David Thompson admitted to having some reservations about Al at first because, quote, so much of his career was spent at a large metro daily. That's going to follow you around, Al. But David also remembered Al's days with Al Smith at the Russellville Weekly and was ecstatic that this experience came through in his approach. David wrote, quote, he knew how to talk with our rural editors, to work with them, to help them. He was always open to their reasons for how their newspapers operated. Becky Barnes, the now retired editor of the Cynthiana Democrat, saw Al's lengthy background as a political columnist as a plus. Barnes wrote, quote, anyone who has ever worked in small markets knows just about everything in small towns revolve around some sort of politics. And Sharon Burton, the publisher of Farmland Publications in Adair County, recalled frequent conversations with her own extension agent. And for those who do not know, Al is the only faculty member outside the College of Agriculture with an extension professorship. And that's a job that Al proudly wears, a title that he proudly holds. Quote, I have laughed about that many times, his extension title, because I have covered agriculture for years and I know the value of all that free expertise our farmers get, Burton wrote. I took him seriously and I made use of his expertise on a regular basis. Burton also referenced the connections she has made across the country and beyond thanks to Al Cross. We should note again that all three of these nominations come from former recipients of the Al Smith Award. Because of the great work that they collectively admire and our appreciation of that great effort, we are honored to present the special Al Smith Polaris Award tonight to Al Cross.
Thank you very much. Yes, you did a great job of keeping it a secret. I very much appreciate it. I've come full circle in my career. I told Susan Page today that when I was a student at Western Kentucky University, I was on track to become the editor, and they said, you know, you probably can't get a Courier-Journal internship as a rising junior, but go up there and do the interview, and you'll get your foot in the door and get one when you're a rising senior. So I didn't know what to expect. I went to 6th and Broadway, ran into Joe Creason in the elevator, but when I went to be interviewed, here were 13 editors and the publisher, Barry Bingham Jr. A Courier Journal internship was a really prized thing, and I can't tell you anything about that meeting other than the fact that I was sorely intimidated. I was one of these small town kids who, thought Louisville was a really big city. And when the opportunity came the next year to help some friends of mine get a newspaper going in Monticello, the next town over, that looked a lot easier or a lot more comfortable. Well, I wound up having to close that newspaper, and luckily Martha Helen, Al Smith was there to give me a job, and I could never have gotten to work for the Courier Journal had I not worked for the best weekly newspaper publisher in the state. So after a number of years at the paper, I wanted to do something different, and I found a way to get back to my roots as a promoter and advisor for rural journalists. And for 14 years, my students and I published the Midway Messenger between here and Frankfort. And I finally got to achieve my career goal, I guess, of being a rural editor and publisher. But my real sense of accomplishment, I guess, is that I've left something that will last because I have a worthy successor. So let's give Benji a hand as we leave this evening.
And I would like to say a few words.
You may.
Nothing could please me more, and nothing would have pleased my Al Smith than to know that this other Al has received this special award. You have no idea. From the first few weeks when he came to work at the News Democrat and slept in Carter's bedroom, he has been like another son to us. My Al absolutely thinks that this Al hung the moon, and he had the greatest appreciation and greatest respect for all that he has been able to do with this idea that he and Rudy Abramson came up with. We could not have had anyone who could have done what Al Cross has done to develop this institute, and I want to thank you, Al, from the bottom of my heart, to being this Al.
Thank you. Did you know about this? Okay.
I'm just saying.
Martha Helen, can we get a picture? Martha Helen? Where's our photographer? There we go. And two of you together.
Oh, that's wonderful.
It's a nice ending for this night. Al was not aware of it, and so we're glad to be able to honor him. We also are deeply appreciative of all of your support for the Institute, for your presence tonight, and for everything you do with us. So thank you, and have a good evening.
Thank you.